feel very strange welcoming you to Downing Street, like I have any ownership over this space, but let me figure out.
My crib.
Thank you both so much for being here today. I know this is an area that you're both really interested in, but I've not actually met you before. So I'm Emily Hunt, and I'm an independent advisor at the Ministry of Justice working on the Rape Review. I sometimes joke that my job is to be a thorn in the side of the government, and that I have the shortest job description in the government, which is to help increase rape prosecution. But that's me, but I really want to hear about you two and how you're here today. How about you, Sarah?
I'm Zara McDermott. I am a documentary filmmaker. I was the victim of image-based sexual abuse when I was 14 and then again when I was 21. This is an area that I feel really passionately about. I actually made a documentary in 2020 that I released in 2021, all about my experience and learning about what revenge porn, as it's called, looks like in the landscape of the country, and how we can make changes.
Brilliant, thank you. And thank you for being here.
Thank you.
How about you?
Hi, I'm Kate Isaacs, and I founded the Not Your Porn campaign in 2019. A friend of mine actually ended up on Pornhub without her consent, and I started researching and digging into the law and found that the laws that we have in this country around image-based sexual abuse are not fit for purpose. As part of my campaign, unfortunately, I was targeted with online abuse, and that also included a deep fake that was going around as well. So I have a new perspective, I suppose, on image-based sexual abuse as well from that position.
I think that's actually a really good place to start. So I think for me, one of the things that's hard in talking about this area is to actually explain what we mean by intimate image abuse or intimate image crime. So how would you explain to somebody who doesn't know what we're talking about what intimate image abuse is?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because this is something I think about quite a lot in terms of the actual kind of legal definition of image-based sexual abuse is sharing an image or video of someone without their consent with the intent to cause distress or harm or humiliation. In both of my cases, I don't think there was that intent. So that's kind of something I definitely wanted to chat about today. Like also what is intent? How do we prove intent? Does that mean that someone whose image was shared without that intent is any less deserving of, you know, that person being prosecuted than someone who had that experience, because it's both equally humiliating and equally damaging.
Yeah. So I think actually what you bring up right there is perfect, because the other thing I wanted to ask was about how these crimes impact victims, because I know inevitably we've all run into people who think, oh, stop making a big deal of it. That's not something that we need to be talking about, and it really is. And I know in my experience it had a huge impact on me being a victim of a different sort of intimate image crime. But I think actually maybe it'd be really helpful if we could talk about what this does to victims, really.
I started the campaign in 2019 because a friend of mine ended up on a porn website, and in terms of her mental health, like, it completely declined. She became like a shell of a person. It felt really violating. It was an act of sexual violence. And once I then founded that campaign and started working with other survivors across the world, it was really similar experiences coming through. So feeling very much like violated, feeling like they had been sexually abused, and that lack of consent comes through all the time. And that feeling of like lack of control over your own image, your own body, you know, and that's terrifying. And we know as women how scary that prospect is anyway. And then to have that kind of digital element of it and it being shared publicly, it's just devastating for victims. And I know when it happened to me with the deep fake, like that lack of control and that humiliation and that fear, like, it's so terrifying and lonely. And when it's not taken seriously, because we have this really strange culture of victim blaming around image-based sexual abuse, the asking the question of, well, you shouldn't have recorded that in the first place, or, you know, did you not know when you went home and slept with him? And actually, it's like the 2022 version of, well, why were you wearing a short skirt if you didn't want to be raped? And unfortunately, we need to change. We really need to change that narrative to make it so victims can come forward and they feel like they can come forward without that shame or stigma.
Thank you. Zara, what would you say the impact is of these crimes on victims?
I mean, to be honest, it's devastating. It's actually life-shattering. It is the most awful experience. I mean, this happened to me for the first time when I was 14 years old. I was pressured into sending a photo of myself to a boy in my year. He convinced me that it wasn't going to go anywhere, and he really liked me, and I was really impressionable. You know, I was 14, and I had a really awful experience. It actually ruined my life pretty much up until I was 18, and I managed to leave school and get a job. I actually worked in the civil service, so I was lucky that I had that change of environment at 18. But 4 years of my life, and those are really formative years. And it went to my teachers, it went to all of my peers, it got printed out and put on desks. It ruined my whole life, and you know, I still think back to that a lot and remember how much, and I also think what a different person I may have been if that didn't happen to me. Yeah. When it happened again when I was 21, I felt like I've done this before, I can do it again. Fortunately, the rules, the laws had changed in that time. When I was 14, I was actually suspended from school because of what happened to me. So I now say it's like what happened to me, because at the time it felt like I was the perpetrator of my own crime, and I was vilified because I had sent that image and I'd created child pornography, and I was actually told that in my school and by authorities. So then when it happened again at 21, it was a crazy experience, because I expected all of that when I was 14, but actually things had changed in society. Yeah. I remember I came out of Love Island after this happened to me. I went into a TV show, and it happened while I was in there. I came out, and people were actually saying, oh, poor Zara, and saying this is really awful that this happened to her. And I was like, really? Like, I'm actually not a criminal. And I'd criminalized myself for so long. It's really sad the effect that had, and there being no laws around it at the time, and what an effect that had. And now I've been able to have that closure on that time in my life all these years later, because I realized I wasn't the person that did anything wrong. And you know, this is why this conversation is so important, because I want to get the word out there. I don't want anyone to go through what I went through, that kind of feeling of shame and that feeling of self-blame and thinking you've done something so wrong and you should be so embarrassed. Like, I want to bridge that gap of knowledge, tell people that this is a crime, people can be prosecuted, and try and remove some of that judgment that goes on in society.
Yeah, definitely.
And you know, that experience that Zara had in school, that's not that different from what kids in school are experiencing today. I've had so many teenagers under the age of 18 get in contact with the campaign, saying that they are absolutely terrified to tell any adult in their life that, you know, they've gone on Snapchat, they've sent a snap to a boy, he's screenshotted it, they've shared it around, it gets uploaded to porn websites, and they're terrified to come forward because in sex ed they're told that they could be prosecuted for making child pornography. And to put that responsibility and that heavy weight on children, and it's just not the way to do things. Like, you cannot tell a child that they are committing a sexual offence. If you cannot give consent for sex under the age of 16 in this country, you cannot give consent for distributing or making images of yourself in that way as well. And like, I think the legal change is so massively important, but we've also got to look at the social impact and the way that we view these crimes as a society, and how we talk to our children about them too.
Definitely. And so your friend came to you and told you that this had happened, and that's what inspired you to start your campaign. And then you were then a victim of a similar crime as a result of being in public. When that happened to you, who did you feel like you could talk to about it?
I'd been campaigning really tirelessly for about a year or two at that point, and it was with a specific focus around making it illegal for porn websites to host image-based sexual abuse. And as a result of that campaigning, we actually managed to get about 80% of Pornhub's content removed, which was about 10 million videos at the time. And it was like, what a great day. Like, it was one of those days, because it was unverified. So that 80%, I don't believe there's anything inherently wrong with porn, but that 80% was completely unverifiable by age or consent, and they had to wipe it. And so for the hundreds of victims I've been working with at that time, that was such a victory. Just to get it off that one site felt like such a victory. But unfortunately, there were a very small, loud group of men on Twitter who were very upset by it. And I think we know, like, all of us here have probably experienced because we are campaigners and women, we're probably going to face backlash, unfortunately. And the way that I was targeted was through sexual violence. So because I'd got this content removed and they wanted to silence me and they wanted to shut me up, they decided the way to do that was to threaten me. And they posted my home address online, they posted my work address online, they told me they were going to follow me home, rape me, film it, and upload it to a porn website. And then as part of that, they made a deep fake of me and they put my face from an interview I'd done at the BBC into this porn video and spread it. As a narrative of, well, this is the reason why, actually, that she wants to get rid of all this content because she's in a porn film and she's ashamed of it. And in that moment, you know, that kind of campaign against me was just terrifying. Like, I can't even explain to you in that moment, and being a victim of sexual abuse anyway, those feelings really do come up again. And that lack of control and that violation in your own identity, I couldn't have prepared for that. Even though I had done all of this campaigning, I've been working with a number of different organizations. I was giving victims advice on what to do if they became a victim of this, or like what to do if they had become a victim, or what you should do if you do. And in that moment, I forgot all of that. Yeah. And it's horrible, right? Like, I wish I'd followed my own advice. But when you're in that moment and you see that image of yourself and you know that other people are viewing it and they don't know whether it's you or not, so actually whether it is your body or not doesn't matter because you can't tell anyway, that feeling was just all consuming, and it made me consider stop campaigning for a while for my own personal safety, and, you know, just because it was just too triggering really to delve into it. But I found the strength again, and I've, you know, back better than ever, and I have a new fire in my belly because of that experience. Yeah. And especially around deepfakes as well, it kind of brought to light the seriousness of this issue within the kind of confines of image-based sexual abuse.
Yeah. Thanks. Zara, you've talked about the real difference in how you were treated between when you were 14 and when you were 21 when this happened to you. Did it change for you as well who you talked to, who you confided in, or who gave you advice?
Absolutely. I think that when I was 14, this happened to me. I think when you're a teenager, you go through those stages of, you know, not wanting to speak to your parents as much and being a bit more isolated. And that's just how I felt regardless of you know, this happening. Yeah. But then when the image was shared, I isolated myself further. My parents had no idea what to do. Yeah. And were incredibly confused at what had even happened and how it had happened and why. And, you know, the school were telling them, you know, she's done something wrong, she deserves to be punished. And so I had all those residual feelings, I think, from then when it happened again when I was 21, and then seeing everyone's reaction be so different and people being like, Zara, it's okay, like, I can't believe this happened to you. It was because I'd been conditioned for all those years, yeah, a very big proportion of my life, to believe that I was in the wrong, and it was a really shameful period in my life, and I'd let down my family, and I'd let down my friends, I'd let down myself, and everyone where I lived, everyone in the area knew me for that. Then to when I was 21 and people putting their hand on me almost digitally though, and saying, I'm really sorry this happened to you, and, you know, speaking out about my experience, I was like, okay, I now feel really empowered. I'm going to speak out about this, yeah, because no one else really had at that point. I didn't feel like anyone had. And I started talking about it, and talking about it in the press, talking about it wherever I possibly could, because I started to realize that I was a victim. Yeah. I wasn't a perpetrator of, yeah, a crime. And then, you know, that's kind of why I'm here today, is because I've been speaking about it so much. And it makes me really sad to think that any other person would ever believe that they caused it themselves. And I think we live in an age now where everything is online. We can't be so naive to think that sex doesn't happen online. People are meeting online, people meet from across the world online, people are talking online. I met my boyfriend online. Like, everything is happening online, yeah, nowadays. We can't be so naive to think that that doesn't extend to sex as well. Yeah. And those intimate relationships. So there needs to be punishable, you know, laws around this in this kind of area, because unfortunately we're missing the mark a lot in this country, and it's sad to see so many people not knowing where to turn when this happens to, yeah, them still. Yeah.
So it's, I mean, I don't know what you know about me, which is that in 2015 I woke up cold and naked in a hotel bed next to a man I'd never seen before. And a year later, the police told me that he had taken a 1 minute and 2 second long video of me naked and unconscious on the hotel bed. And I am very private, and I had to leave the room because I felt like I was going to be sick. And I went back into the room the first thing I asked the police was, did he upload it? Where did he put it? Did he share it? Does he still have it? Where is it? Is it being used as porn? You know, what is this? And they just looked at me like, I don't know, why would we know that? It's like, well, you've got the digital output from his phone. Like, where is this video and what has happened with it? And I'm told that he probably didn't upload it anywhere. And at the time they said it wasn't a crime, that videoing somebody when you were in the same room with them was not a crime, that you had no expectation of privacy. And what I then did was I brought a judicial review to help clarify the law on voyeurism. But for me, that's when I got really involved in looking at the fact that our current laws are not necessarily fit for purpose. And I started talking about how we really need 21st century laws for these 21st century crimes. You think about what you used to need to film a naked video of somebody. You know, you needed cameras and lights and a crew, and now we all have these incredibly powerful cameras in our pockets, and it means that we need new ways of protecting ourselves and each other. And for me, that's why it's important for me to be here today. But obviously my experience is really different to yours and to your friends, and also to your experience as well. But it is just something that I feel really passionately about. So I am really thankful for you both being here to talk about this as we start to look at ways of addressing the laws on making sure that people are more protected against what's happened to you both and your friend as well. Yeah. But I think it is also what sort of advice we could, from our experiences, provide to somebody who's just found out that this has happened to them, or that their friend has had this happen to them. Like, where do we tell people to start?
I always say, save everything you can. And it feels so counterintuitive because you're looking at something and you're like, oh my God, I want to get rid of this really, really quickly. So it feels weird to want to save that image or that video, but save down as much as you can. Take screen grabs, timestamps. If it's a video, try and save the file itself. And that's really, really important, because if you get that wiped from the internet in that site, it doesn't necessarily, it's been wiped anywhere else. So, but if you have that original file, it means that we can do really clever things like digitally fingerprint that image, and we can have automatic systems that kind of scour the web for things like that. So practically, that's one of the first things I would do. In terms of emotional support and then dealing with that aftermath, we have a fantastic resource in this country called the Revenge Porn Helpline. It's a free service to use. They give the best advice, quite frankly, and they are dedicated women who feel so passionately about this topic. They can help you get images removed from websites. They can give you advice and next steps. And then I think just generally, and I don't think, again, having been a victim of this now, it feels a little bit strange saying it, but like, just don't panic, don't feel shame, and have the kind of confidence to be able to reach out to the Not Your Porn campaign and tell us your story and let us see how we can help. Like, you are so not alone. The amount of emails I have had through in the last couple of years from women and girls, and it is predominantly women and girls, begging for help because they feel like this has just happened to them and no one's talking about it, and this has only happened to them, and they don't know what to do, and they're ashamed, and they're fearful of like the consequences of it. Like, you are so not alone. And you know, I really appreciate you sharing your story about sexual violence, because this is kind of part of the same thing. Yeah. I think we think about these two spaces. We've got the real world, and then we've got the online virtual world. And as Zara was saying, like, that separation and that divide doesn't exist anymore.
We don't live separate lives between the online and the offline.
It's
one.
Completely integrated. Yeah. And so if it's an act of sexual violence, if it's a sexual act where you are not consenting to be in that situation, that needs to be taken as seriously as we take other sexual crimes in this country. And we need to create laws and legislation around it that means that, you know, I've been talking to police forces for the last couple of years. They have no idea what the existing law is. They don't know how to access these websites. We go to schools, teachers don't know what to do. They don't know the law. Like, we need an absolute overhaul if we are going to get this under control, and new legislation and legislative processes need to come into place if we're ever going to tackle this, because this isn't just something happening in this strange, like, online virtual world. Like, this is real, and it's a form of ways and a way of silencing women, and a form of you know, in a sexual manner, in a violent manner, and that needs to be taken as seriously as we take other sexual crimes in this country.
Yeah.
And I also echo what Kate said about people not knowing, the police forces not knowing, teachers not knowing, students, young people, you know, older people, people in relationships. No, it's all well and good, you know, changing legislative processes, changing the law, making certain things a crime. That's fantastic to do that. But actually filtering that down to the depths of society so that everyone knows what is illegal and what's against the law. And also not only just to deter people from doing it in the first place, but also to tell people if they are a victim that what you have been through is against the law. It is, you know, someone has committed a criminal offence against you and you can report it, because I think that there is a massive miscommunication with all of that. So I think that's another reason why it's so important to be here, be talking, be sharing on our socials, be constantly telling people online that this is the legislative process and you can follow it.
Yeah. I think for me, one of the things that was really helpful was when I started speaking in public, because I think up until that point I had, similar to what you were talking about, shame and lots of self-victim blaming. And for me, in every time I have a public conversation, like this one or any of them really, somebody reaches out to me online to say that something like this happened to them and that they thought it was only them, or they thought that they in some way caused it, or they thought that it was something to be ashamed of and that they hadn't told anyone or didn't know how to tell anyone or anything like that. And for me, I remember in the moments after everything first happened to me, and then when I found out about the video, I couldn't move. You know, I didn't know there was support or help or even what to call it. And for me, you know, I was really surprised when I was told that it wasn't illegal to video someone. And I think the thing that I'm proudest of having done in my entire life is to clarify that law, and that now I get messages from people who are told, you know, the police told me this is illegal. You can no longer think that you can get away with videoing a partner without their consent because it is illegal, and people have been prosecuted for it, including my attacker who was found guilty. But I think, you know, having these public conversations can really help victims realize that they are not alone, that there are places to go to help, and that there are conversations to participate in so that we can all move everything forward.
And I felt the same thing, you know, obviously I started the campaign because no one was really having that conversation online. And that to me felt really strange. You know, we're having conversations about image-based sexual abuse, don't get me wrong, but the lack of consent needed to share or an image or for a porn website to host it. Like I'm like, why is no one talking? Like, why are we not having these conversations? And you realize it's because victims of this type of crime have already been put into a situation that they have not consented to in a public way. Why on earth would anyone pull themselves out of that for the trauma anyway? Like survivors should not be the ones doing the fighting here or the reforming of laws. Absolutely not. But unfortunately, that's what's been happening. And no one was talking about it online because those who were victims of it didn't want to carry on that conversation. They didn't want to put that out there anymore. So when I decided to do the documentary about what happened to me after campaigning and then getting deep faked, actually, I found that really therapeutic.
Yeah.
And you talk about sharing your story and you kind of go through it and it's a way of processing it almost, right? And after I did that, even though we had loads of, you know, like the vast majority of people are good people and who support the new legislation coming in and the new laws around it. And it's only really a small minority, loud minority that don't. But like, I was so taken aback by the amount of people who contacted me and they said, thank you so much, like for making me feel seen. Like someone said, this isn't really you, so why are you worried about it? Kind of that just it's about normalizing it and having those conversations. And I always say about image-based sexual abuse and porn in general, if we don't have those conversations, we give it its power. And it's able to kind of run its own wild, wild west. If we're not having conversations with ourselves, with each other, with partners, with children, with law enforcement, we're going to allow it to just continue to grow in the dark, deep depths. And unfortunately, until we acknowledge it, we can't sort of undo some of the damage that's created.
So Kate, you have a lot of experience in campaigning and fighting against deep fakes, but could you give us a definition of what deep fakes are in just a sentence or two for anybody who isn't really clear on what that means?
Yep, so deep faking, it isn't just about intimate images, it can be anything, but it's basically technology that superimposes your face or your image into a video that you actually weren't in, so it's like a virtual fake scenario. When it comes to deep fake porn or image-based sexual abuse, that's when they use your face or your image and they superimpose that into a video that is a porn film that exists already to make it look like you yourself are in that porn film. And it's really scary because this isn't like difficult tech anymore.
Yeah.
It's like Photoshop. Back in the day, you had to have a lot of skills on Photoshop to be able to edit an image. Now there are apps you can download and you click a button and you can alter it really quickly. That's what's happening with deepfake technology on the porn front. Like, this isn't a skill anymore. This is very, very realistic imagery that can be downloaded via an app. And we need to get that under control very, very quickly because we're already about 20,000 steps behind and we need to keep up on that front. But it's a very serious, serious thing to happen to someone. And I think the fact that it's not virtual or elements aren't you doesn't really matter because that's the reality and that's what people see and that's the reality of that for them.
Thank you. I just have a couple more questions. So I think we've all talked about how important it is for this to improve and how we want victims to be better protected with newer laws that are more in line with current technology. But how do you think changes in the laws, like the ones that we're talking about today, will help protect victims?
You go first.
Obviously, we passed a revenge porn law back in 2014-15 in this country. And although that felt like a big step at the time, it's still very loose. There are still a lot of loopholes that means that prosecutions are incredibly low. And that is because you have to prove intent to harm. And that's complicated because a lot of the time image-based sexual abuse might not be. It might cause harm, but the intent to harm, isn't necessarily there. It could be for sexual gratification, for money, for profit, for trying to intimidate someone. Like, there's such a wide range of ways and reasons and motives why people commit this crime. So that's massively outdated. Also, in terms of the technology around it now, I contributed to the Online Harms Bill in 2020. My contribution is now out of date because now in 2022, it's completely moved on. Yeah. And so we really, really need to get a hold of this and start passing laws and regulations that protect victims and communicate that this is a crime. So revenge porn, as we call it, intimate image-based sexual abuse, you should be able to prosecute someone just regardless of what their motive was, because quite frankly, that doesn't really matter and it shouldn't matter. And also the fact that like deep fakes isn't considered intimate image-based sexual abuse or revenge porn when it is, by kind of its own definition. We need to make sure that we really tighten those laws, fill in those gaps, close those loopholes, to make sure that, people realize that it's not okay to do this, but also to make sure that there are prosecutions and, people out there do see that this could get you in serious trouble. This is a crime, should be villainized for it. Yeah. And until we close those loopholes, I really hope that actually happens in the very, very near future, because right now we are running out of time and we're chasing something that's like got such a head start on us. Yeah. And so the importance and the urgency of these laws getting passed and put through, it's absolutely, completely, it's so important that we get this wrapped under control as soon as possible, and that we have the process in place that when another form of intimate image-based sexual abuse comes up, because it will, we have legislative processes that can get that through a lot quicker. Yeah. And until we do that, we're always going to be about 20 steps behind any sort of digital sexual crime.
I remember when I first found out about the video of me, I remember thinking, why is my email address more protected than my body? Why is GDPR so protective of my personal data and information? And how is my body not my personal data and information? And I remember I just kept saying that, and nobody seemed to understand why I felt that way. And I think you're right. There's a lot here that makes it complicated because technology does move on. And I think we do need to be thinking about not just today's victims, but tomorrow's victims as well.
Totally. And that's why I started the campaign. And I don't want to bring children into this world until this is fixed, because I cannot see another generation of children go through what I've witnessed this generation, our generation, go through. We just can't let it happen. And it's a sexual violence against women and girls. Yeah. And that needs to be taken seriously. And unfortunately, in lots of ways at the moment, it's not.
Sarah, how do you think changes in laws like this could help protect victims?
I mean, I think, again, I echo what Kate said and what I said earlier about intent. I think that these changes are brilliant, and it's good that government are trying their very best to be as current as possible. My worry is that I can't prove intent with either of my experiences.
Yeah.
I cannot prove intent with a lot of experiences that I've actually seen. You know, I've witnessed friends be sent someone else's image with no explanation, just sent because it's easy. They're actually, you know, there's intent with some cases, but my opinion is there's a lot that there's no intent there.
Yeah.
So that is equally as humiliating and it's equally as damaging. But I think that my biggest fear is that there's a lot of people that will be missed and feel that they can't come forward and talk because of that word.
Yeah.
And I would love for that to be clarified a bit more.
Yeah, definitely. My last one. What more do you both think the government could be doing in this area?
I want to come at this like from an optimistic perspective. I really do. And I feel like from a campaigning perspective, if you don't have that optimism, where does your motivation go? I think it's so important we are having these conversations today. I think it's really important that the government is reviewing the Law Commission report and widening the definitions and closing those loopholes. Yeah. I'm really concerned about follow through. And I appreciate that the legislative process and policy making is a slow process that needs a lot of care and consultation into it. But we don't have time. And so in terms of these changes on paper, they look fantastic. There are still lots of things I think we need to work out, and there are other loopholes we need to close, but we need follow through. And until that happens, I can't, and this is probably not what anyone wants to hear, but I can't celebrate it because I've watched these online harms laws and bills be shelved time and time again, and it's time for us to really kind of not just shelve issues about women and girls, and it's not just this government, it's the government before it, but we need to take action now. We need we need action to be pushed forward, and having these conversations are massively important. But until those laws and those regulations are passed, we're still going to be letting down those victims and future women and girls. And that is what we need so desperately. And this is a step in the right direction, absolutely. And this is a positive step in the right direction, but we need follow through.
What one thing, if we could just share one thing with the British public today about intimate image abuse and the new legislation that we're talking about, what one thing would you share with them?
I mean, for me, it's actually, I really hope this conversation starts to bridge the gap between generations. I think that something I've seen time and time and time again with victims is that they feel that maybe their parents, their grandparents, their guardians, the older people in their life may not understand because this is not something they grew up with. But I would really encourage people who aren't familiar with this legislation to brush up on the law, brush up on what you can do. I would encourage parents, grandparents, teachers to know exactly what the processes are for someone who goes through this. And also, anyone can be a victim. It doesn't matter what age you are. Don't feel ashamed. It's not your fault. Yeah. And make sure you report what's happened to you and speak to a friend or family member.
Brilliant. Thank you. How about you, Kate?
I want the British public to not tolerate it anymore. I think that's the key message, is do not tolerate this at all. This is intimate image-based sexual abuse, but it's an act of sexual violence. It's an act of sexual abuse. Do not tolerate it. I'd also say that I would love everyone in this country to read up on the effects of intimate image-based sexual abuse and the definitions of it. Talk to your children about it. Yeah. Please talk to your children about it. I know it's a difficult conversation. I know us Brits are quite prudish, but these conversations are so vital for the next generation. Like, have the conversations and don't rest until these changes are made, whether that be social or legal. Just don't rest, because we deserve better. Women and girls in this country deserve better, quite frankly, than we've got at the moment. And it's coming.
I think for me, if there's one thing that I want the British public to know, it's that if you don't have someone's express consent to take a photo or a video, don't. And if you don't have their express consent to share it, don't. I don't necessarily feel like this is something that we need to have complicated conversations around, because at the end of the day,
It's simple.
exactly, if you don't have someone's express consent to take a photo of them, don't do it. You know, and I was talking earlier about the difference between the image of my body and my email address, and why my email address is more protected than the image of my body. And it shouldn't be. But we do need laws, and we need to make sure that people who break these laws are punished. And that's why it's really important that we're updating laws for new crimes, for new technology. But really, it does come down to societal change as well. If you don't have someone's consent, just don't do it. It doesn't feel that hard to me.
I know, you'd think, right?